Welcome. Trauma is my jam, and by that I mean I help you understand what your body is doing. Let's make sense of it together.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of From Trauma to Triumph. Today, we are going to talk about something that confuses a lot of people in trauma recovery, myself included. Why some trauma feels easier to talk about, while other trauma feels like woven into everything of who you are, or like there, but you don't quite understand where it comes from. What we're talking about today is the difference between single event trauma versus complex trauma and what the differences of those are. And understanding those differences can be incredibly validating. At least it really was for me. Because if healing has felt confusing or slow, there may be a very real reason for that. Now, let's start with single event trauma. A single event trauma is what most people think of when they hear the word trauma. Generally, it happens once or during a clearly defined moment in time. So examples of that would be like a car accident, an assault, a medical emergency, a natural disaster, witnessing a traumatic event. When something like this happens, the brain alarm, the amygdala, activates immediately, and stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flood the body and the nervous system, and your body moves into survival mode. That's where we start experiencing that fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown. But importantly, the trauma is connected to a specific event in time. Many people with single event trauma will say something like, I was fine before the accident, because the nervous system remembers the trauma as a moment. Now, complex trauma is different. Instead of one moment, it involves repeated experiences of stress, instability, or emotional injury over time. Often this happens during childhood while the nervous system is still developing. Examples of this would be like growing up with an emotionally unavailable caregiver, chronic emotional neglect, long-term abuse, living in unpredictable or unstable environments, repeatedly feeling unseen, unsupported, or unsafe. So instead of the nervous system responding to one experience, the body has learned how to adapt to an environment. The nervous system then begins forming new patterns designed to survive the environment. Patterns like hypervigilance, people-pleasing, emotionally shutting down, difficulty trusting people, isolating when things get hard, and taking responsibility for everyone else's emotions. Again, these are not personality flaws. These are adaptations that were designed and put in place in order to keep us safe. Now, I'm going to share an example with you from my experience of a single event trauma. Several years ago, I was in a car accident. And after the accident, my nervous system was extremely reactive around driving. Driving suddenly became a very anxious experience for me. And in fact, I didn't drive for several months because I simply could not put myself behind the wheel again. My body associated driving with danger. My nervous system learned that driving equals threat. But over time, with small exposure and practice, my nervous system began to calm, and I slowly started driving again. Short trips first, then gradually longer ones. And eventually my body learned something important. Driving itself doesn't have to be dangerous. The accident was the danger, and that was only one moment in time. The other part of that is I had had plenty of other experiences driving prior to the accident where driving was safe. So this was a moment where something that was safe before became unsafe. So that's important too. Using an example of the complex trauma that I have. So for me, a lot of my complex trauma comes from growing up in a household where I had a parent who was emotionally unavailable. Now listen, It's important that you understand that I am saying this with compassion and no blame, because I know and understand that parents give what they can with the tools that they have. And I also know that you cannot give what you never received. So if you don't have it to give, you can't give it. And I'm going to tell you that I know clearly that this parent also grew up in the same kind of environment at home. Now, my physical needs were always met. But emotionally, there was not a sense of stability or safety around having my needs recognized or supported. So my nervous system adapted because it's designed to keep me safe. So my body learned that not having needs kept me safe. If I didn't express a need, I couldn't be disappointed. If I focused on keeping other people happy, that kept my environment calmer. And if I took care of myself on my own, that felt safer than relying on someone else. So I became really good at people pleasing, taking care of everyone else, minimizing my own needs, and figuring things out on my own. And those patterns have followed me into adulthood. And today, the way that shows up for me looks like this: struggling to reach out when I need emotional support, isolating when things are difficult, and taking care of everyone else while ignoring my own needs. Now, let's talk about why single event trauma and complex trauma feel so different. One of the biggest differences is clarity. The anxiety I feel around driving after the accident makes sense because it is clear that what I'm feeling and what my body is experiencing is directly connected to the accident. And there's no shame in that. Of course, my nervous system reacts to a serious car accident. Of course, I would be afraid to drive and nervous and feeling unsafe driving after the accident. That makes sense. But with complex trauma, the patterns are often harder to understand. When I struggle to ask for support or I isolate during difficult times, it doesn't feel connected to that one moment. It feels like something's wrong with me. And that confusion often brings an extra layer of shame. But the reason it feels different comes down to how the brain learns through repetition. Now, our brains are pattern recognition machines. The nervous system learns through repeated experiences. So with complex trauma, the nervous system may have experienced the same emotional pattern over and over again. Reaching out, not getting my needs met, expressing emotion, not being validated or being told that I'm too emotional, needing support and not receiving it, feeling hurt. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. And with complex trauma, the nervous system has experienced the same emotional pattern over and over again. So reaching out and not getting my needs met, expressing emotions and not being validated or being told that I'm too emotional, or needing support and not receiving it, like feeling hurt or alone. When something happens hundreds of times, the brain stores that as a survival rule. The nervous system begins to believe this is how the world works. So those survival strategies become deeply wired. But with single event trauma like my car accident, my brain also had other information. I had driven hundreds of times safely before the accident. So my nervous system had evidence that driving was generally safe. The accident was the exception, not the rule. That difference is incredibly important because the nervous system processes those two experiences very differently. Now, this is why healing also looks different for each. Healing from the car accident involved helping my nervous system understand that the danger had passed. And for me, that involved gradual exposure, practice, and allowing my body to relearn safety behind the wheel. And over time, my nervous system has recalibrated. But healing complex trauma is different because it isn't tied to one event. and it is likely tied to years of learned survival patterns. Healing involves slowly teaching the nervous system something new, that needs are allowed, that support can be safe, and that connection does not always lead to hurt. And that takes time, and it often involves things like trauma-informed therapy, somatic work, nervous system regulation, having safe relationships, and practicing new relational experiences. Because the brain is not just healing from a moment, it is rewiring patterns built through years of repetition. All right, before we wrap up today, I wanted to offer you a small regulation exercise that can be helpful for healing from complex trauma. Because remember, trauma patterns are deeply ingrained, and the goal isn't to force yourself to change overnight. Your goal is to gently explore safety in your nervous system. That is what's going to rewire these trauma responses that you have. And it takes a lot of practice. So, if you feel safe and able, I invite you to try this with me. We're going to start by taking a slow breath in through the nose, and then a slow exhale through your mouth, but make sure your exhale is just slightly longer than the inhale. This triggers your vagus nerve system and puts that level, reminds your body, okay, we're safe. Triggers that system that tells the rest of your body we are safe. Just that longer exhale. All right, let's do it one more time. So inhale and exhale. Now, I'm going to invite you, if it feels safe for you, to bring to mind something that feels slightly uncomfortable, but safe enough to explore. We're not going after the big stuff here. Maybe like the idea of asking someone for support, or the idea of expressing a need, or the idea of letting someone help you. Okay, so I want you to bring to mind something that feels slightly uncomfortable, but safe enough to explore. So some examples might be the idea of asking someone for support, or the idea of expressing a need, or the idea of letting somebody help you. And I just want you to notice what happens in your body when you imagine that. You might notice tension. You might notice that your chest is tightening. For me, I get it in my shoulders and in my jaw. You might feel an urge to shut down or like dismiss the thought, like, I'm okay, I don't need somebody. It'll be okay. I can do this on my own. I just want you to give yourself a couple moments to explore. When you think of that situation, what do you notice happening in your body and happening in your mind? Because all of this is important information. This is your nervous system showing you the patterns it has learned to survive. And instead of trying to change the feeling, we are going to try to introduce a little bit of safety to the system. So, as you are imagining this situation, and you are feeling the feels, and you're in your body, and your body is starting to feel unsafe, I want you to bring yourself back to the present. And you can do that in a couple ways. You can look around the room and start identifying objects that you see. You can look around the room and start identifying like colors. You can reach for an object that is nearby and you can hold on to it and just feel the weight of it. Feel the different texture of it. Just be present with that in your moment. You can press your feet firmly to the ground to feel that support, to put that pressure back in your body. You can take another slow breath, so turning your attention to your breathing and just focus on that inhale and that slightly longer exhale. Then you're going to say to yourself, I am safe in this moment. You are not forcing your system to suddenly trust people or change its patterns. You are simply helping the body learn that in this moment right now, that you are safe. And that is how healing from complex trauma often begins. Not with massive change, but with small moments of teaching the nervous system that the environment today is different from the environment that originally shaped those survival patterns. Over time, these small moments of safety begin to create neural pathways in the brain. And that is how the nervous system slowly learns that the rules it once needed to survive may not be the rules that are needed today. So, if you've ever felt frustrated that some things feel easier to understand and heal, while other patterns feel confusing or deeply ingrained, or you don't even know where they come from, this may be why. Single event trauma is often tied to a clear moment, and complex trauma is woven into how the nervous system learned to survive life itself. But here's the important part. The nervous system can learn safety again. It learned survival once, and it can learn something new now. And understanding what your body has been doing to protect you is the first step in that healing. I am so very grateful to be able to share this information with you all today, and I thank you for being here and for choosing yourself and for allowing me to walk alongside you in this journey. Hope you have a very blessed day.